So this morning we're finishing up the series that we've been in called Renewed, where we've been going through our church, Renewal Church, and our sister campus, St. John's, our understanding of what God has put in front of us. Again, we've talked about how the mission of God is greater than any one congregation. It is worldwide. It is ever moving. God is constantly doing things in every corner of the world. But as a congregation, we have a unique place in it because God, in his infinite wisdom and understanding, has decided to place you and me and Renewal Church and our sister campus, St. John's, in Denver, Colorado in the year 2023. And so what we've been looking at is what does that look like? What does it look like to take the mission of God and faithfully carry it out in this time and place? And so we started by looking at our mission, our understanding that our church exists, that in the midst of distraction and misplaced hope, we are a community that walks together toward a renewed hope and life in Jesus Christ. And then we looked at how do we know that that's happening? What are the marks in our lives that show that we're accomplishing what we set out to do, that we're actually carrying out that mission faithfully? We talked about renewed dependency on God's word and his people, renewed priorities of time, energy, and resources, and a renewed love for the people that God has put in my life. Last week we talked about what are the things that we can do to abide in Christ, to abide in Jesus, to dwell in him, to make him our home. That way we can continue to carry this out. We talked about how we want to gather and worship, what we're doing right now. We want to grow in his word, whether it's through a life group or another study, to be constantly growing in the faith. We want to serve in his name. Part of Jesus' mission is to serve, and so being his, we serve as well. And then finally, we want to go and tell the world the news. And that last part is what we're going to be hitting on today as we kind of finish this up, is our vision for who we are and where we're going. Centers around the essence of what the Christian faith is. Because there's a lot of faiths, if you look at religions around the world, that are a list of here's some successful tips for life, right? They're not bad. Sometimes they're really good tips, right? Here's some really good ways to live. Do this, don't do this. But the essence of the Christian faith is different because it's not a list of do's or don'ts. It's actually news. It's just, in essence, the Christian faith is good news. That's where the word gospel comes from. And good news is funny because we are all very accustomed to sharing good news. When we first got here, some friends took us to a restaurant and exposed us to this really good buffalo cauliflower. And it was so good that we have told like 5 other people about this buffalo cauliflower. Right? And maybe you have a show. Have you ever, you watch a movie or a show and like, this is so good, I just need to tell somebody. So you're talking to friends or family and you're like, have you guys seen this show? You need to watch it. It is so good. It's our default. When we experience something good, we want to tell people about it. And in essence, what the Christian faith is, it is good news of what has been done that we are then invited to share with others. And so the whole Christian life, it's more than just that, but at its essence, it is the sharing of news. People who live according to a certain news that they've been given, and then live a life that shares that news. And so what we're going to be looking at today is what does it look like to live in that news? What does it look like to share that news? And we're going to be looking at Romans chapter 10. So some context for this passage. Paul is writing to the church in Rome, and he's talking about what saving faith looks like, what it looks like to be saved according in God's eyes. And he talks about how there's a temptation to make it something we do. Again, do's and don'ts. There's always going to be that temptation. And he says, is righteousness, or being right with God according to faith, does that mean you ascend to God, you strive and you become holier and reach him one day? He says, no, it's not that. He says, do you descend down to the abyss and lower yourself to some depths to get there? He says, no, it's not that either. And so this is what he says that the Christian faith boils down to. So we're going to be reading from Romans chapter 10. He says, but what does it say? So what does this righteousness according to faith say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. So it's beautiful. So Paul right off the bat says, it is not that you become holier and get to God. It is not that you go so down in the depths that you somehow reach some deeper meaning, but rather that the word, this message, this faith has just come to you. And now it is so near that it actually lives in your mouth and in your heart. And it's beautiful because, again, our temptation is always going to be, we want something that we can achieve. We want something that we can strive for. But Paul says that the essence of the Christian faith is not one that we obtain, but rather one that has just come to us, the one that has just been placed in us, that we've just received. And this is that word of faith that we proclaim. He continues on, he says, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So that's the base. You want to know, what does it mean to be saved? It is to confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. And just a couple observations. So he highlights two parts. They're not unrelated, and the next verses will draw that out even more. But first, you have this word confess. One of the things we just celebrated with Aaliyah is this confession of faith that she's made, that she's continued to grow and confess, this is what I believe. So one of the ways we talk about confess when we say like the Apostles' Creed is this is something I believe in. So I'm going to share it for the world to hear. I'm going to say it out loud. And the confession is that Jesus is Lord, right? That means I'm not saying that I'm Lord. I'm not saying that anything in my life is Lord other than just Jesus. And believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. And so again, this takes out the possibility of Jesus just being a nice guy or really good teacher, because it's confessing that he is Lord of all and that he is the one who is raised from the dead. Those are the two aspects. And the promise, though, is that when you confess that, like we did today, the Apostles' Creed, and in his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, boom, we're confessing this faith, and in believing that God raised him from the dead, there's a promise. You will be saved. Right? There's no there's no get to this. That's what it takes. He connects these two further. He says, for with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. And so there's kind of this natural progression, right? So with the heart one believes and is justified. So as Christians, we hear this news that Jesus Christ, this man who did all of these great works, claimed to be the Son of God, was killed, was raised from the dead, is now seated at God's right hand. We hear this news, and first we believe in our heart. That really happened? Wow, I believe that. And then what comes next is just this natural progression that with the mouth then we confess and are saved. So we hear it, we believe it, and then it flows out. It's this beautiful, you can almost picture like almost like a rhythm, right? You're hearing this news, you believe this news, and then it pours out forth from us. And again, this promise that everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. We live in a culture and a time, different places operate differently, but shame is a very motivating factor for a lot of people. And in some cultures, it's even more so. There's a lot of shame-honor cultures where there's nothing worse than to receive shame from your people, your community. But the promise of Jesus is that believing in him, in the end, you will never be put to shame. Right? That this is not a fruitless faith. This is not a fruitless endeavor. But believing that this is true, that Jesus is Lord, and that God raised him from the dead, ultimately, this is salvation, and there is nothing that can put you to shame in the end. That there's going to be redemption, there's going to be justification when it's all said and done. And so he continues on, he says, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And again, this is where Paul is emphasizing, this is not just for some people. This is not just for some people of a certain culture, of a certain disposition. There are a lot of people who think that the message of Jesus is not for them. Because there's either external factors or internal factors that tell them this isn't really for you. Sometimes it's internal. I listened to this guy. He does not talk about religion or philosophy or anything, but he was talking about some social topic, and he just went on this little tangent one day, and he started talking about, in his opinion, life is so much more fun when you just accept you're going to go to hell. Because then you can just do whatever you want, right? And I was like, that's not why I tuned into this channel. This is not what I thought I was listening to. But what he was getting at it is in his own experience, and I don't even know if he believes in hell. I think he was, just making something funny. But from his own experience, he's just accepted that whatever salvation looks like, whatever it means to be saved, that's not for me. I can't get that. I've already accepted that I've been too bad for it. I do too many dumb things. And so, you know what? At this point, I might as well just have fun, because there's no way that I could possibly achieve what I need to achieve, right? At this point, I've just accepted it, so I'm just going to enjoy my time here while I have it. And so he would be in the category of people who don't understand that this salvation, this promise is for all people. Other people, it's external. So you think about how often the Christian faith is presented as a certain package of cultural influences and political ideas and and certain traditions and rituals. And all of those are not removed from the Christian faith, and the Christian faith influences all of them. So it's not to say that any of those things are inherently wrong, but sometimes we take a certain brand of Christianity, we take a certain understanding of the world, and we kind of package it all and say, if you want to be Christian, you need all of this, right? This is one of the big issues as early Christians went out as missionaries, and throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, they would go into places, and it was kind of like, well, here's how we know how to run society, and so to believe in Jesus, we also need to take all of our understanding about the world, and here you go, rather than making the essence this, calling upon the name of the Lord. Right? And again, those other aspects, they're good. So if you know me, I like traditions, I like rituals, I think that they're helpful. But at some point, they can become so stacked up that people can say, if I don't carry all those same traditions, all those same backgrounds, if that's not my culture, then Jesus is not for me. But Paul specifically calls out that there's no distinction at this point. This is an ethnic, cultural distinction, Jew or Greek, because the same Lord is Lord of all. No matter who you are, no matter what your background, no matter what your beliefs are, Jesus is still the Lord. He is still ruling over all things, whether you know it or not. But the hope then is that everyone will come to know this, that he is the Lord, so they can receive these riches on all who call upon him. Because not everybody knows, right, that Jesus was the one who did where we couldn't do. So that person I told you I listened to, right, said once you accept you're going to hell, you can have a lot more fun. He has maybe heard it, but he doesn't fully realize that Jesus has already achieved heaven for him and given it to him. He doesn't realize that Jesus was scorned and rejected and overcame death so he might receive eternal life as well. And so, again, this is news. This is news that people either don't know or don't believe. And so much of the Christian life revolves around this, proclaiming this, sharing this. Because everyone, again, not just some people, not just certain people, not just people with a certain disposition, but everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so we want everyone to know that promise. Continues on. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Now I want to highlight this middle passage. Paul does kind of a logical progression here, okay? So if everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord is saved, how are people to call on him who they do not believe in? Makes sense, right? If you don't believe in somebody, you're not going to call on them to help you. But then he says this, how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And again, notice how much hearing language gets used in Paul here. People need to hear this. There's a popular quote, and I've seen different people attributed this quote. It's one that I really liked growing up. It was, I think, at one point attributed to a pope, but it goes like this. Preach the gospel every day, and if necessary, use words. Maybe you've heard this. What's really cool about that quote is that it highlights that as Christians, there's a congruency that is needed, that our Christian message is backed with a Christian life. And so as we engage the world, as we are hospitable, and as we promote justice, and we are caring and forgiving, that backs the message that we have. And so that is really good. But here's the problem. The word gospel means good news. And people don't hear news if it's not spoken. Paul makes it very clear. He says, at some point, if people never tell somebody about Jesus, how are they supposed to believe? You can be as nice as you want, you can be as kind as you want, but if they never have a chance to hear, they never have a chance to believe. And so there's this intrinsic connection between hearing and believing. Where again, our actions are incredibly important, right? We want to back a Christian message with a Christian life, as so far as we're able to. But people need to hear. And sometimes what can happen is, and this is something that I am always tempted to do, and this is a challenge for me, is it's really easy just to think I'm nice, I'm kind, and that's good. That's the gospel. But the gospel is Jesus for this person. And so at some point, they need to hear, because they can't believe. And that's why even this word preaching, it does in some ways can represent preaching, what I'm doing right now, but it also just means proclaiming, speaking, announcing good news. Think of like a herald. Do you ever know the story of like the original marathon? This guy runs from like Athens or whatever and announces Nike, which means victory, and then collapses and dies. He's a herald. He's just announcing, we won. And then apparently he was so tired he died. When you announce Jesus, you probably won't fall over and die. But again, it's just an announcing of news. How are people supposed to hear unless somebody announces this news to them? Continues on, again, this logical progression. Thank you. And how are they to preach, again, how are they to announce this news unless they are sent? Okay, so as a church, we are all sent, in a certain sense, to proclaim this news. As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. And so he quotes Isaiah here, but he's talking about the sending, and he just highlights, and feet are not something we think of as beautiful. I don't know about you. Maybe that's your thing. I don't think of feet as like, wow, that's what I would describe as beautiful. And it's this beautiful passage, though, that these things that seem so kind of off-putting, we want to usually hide in shoes or something, that even those glisten and are beautiful in this preaching, this proclaiming, this sharing of the good news. And so much as a church, we are about sending, we are about proclaiming, we are about sharing this news because people need to hear it. Like a really good restaurant, like a really good show, but all the more eternal and powerful and glorified is this news of what Jesus has done. And so we talk about sharing, we talk about proclaiming, and sometimes you'll hear the word witnessing, right? To witness to your faith. And I just want to pick up on that word a little bit because it's an interesting word, and it's a word that the Bible uses. Jesus tells his disciples, you will be my witnesses. And if you've ever seen a court or a movie with a court scene, what do witnesses do? Right? Were you here? What did you see? Right? They just share what they know and what they see. And so, again, if I'm going to jump ahead here, but because they've not obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has never heard from us? So again, people need to hear. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. And so when we think about witnessing to this word, witnessing is sharing what you have seen and known. Witnessing does not always mean that you are an expert. Witnessing is saying, here's what I've seen. Here's what I know. And this is what's so good. It's because news is something we've been shared with, and it's now impacted our lives. It has changed us, and we just get to share that with other people. And it doesn't always have to be so in your face and uncomfortable and forbearing. Sometimes when we think about sharing our faith or proclaiming Jesus, we just think of it as this confrontation, this shove it down your throat. I just want to give one example of how this can look to witness to what Jesus has done without necessarily shoving it down somebody's face. So some of you know this, but 2 Octobers ago, I had a seizure. It's my second seizure. One night I was going to bed, and I fell asleep, and I woke up in an ambulance. And according to my wife, Melanie, as soon as I fell asleep, I started compulsing. She called 911. I got taken to the ambulance, taken to the hospital. Hypothetically, let's say I'm sharing this now, but let's say we're just talking about this. And like, wow, I didn't know you had a seizure. And, you might ask, how was that? And I'll tell you the truth. In the aftermath, it was pretty rough because I didn't have any, major life-altering complications from it originally. I couldn't drive for 6 months. That was a bit of a drag. But in the aftermath, a couple things that did happen is it threw my back out. Man, I was like, welcome to adulthood. Like, you have back problems now. 26 and bam, there you go. Now you can't do anything. But it was really funny because I was used to playing sports every day. I was used to running around. And all of a sudden, I couldn't really twist or turn. I couldn't really run. Everything was painful. I couldn't drive, like I said, so my life was pretty altered there. And also, I remember it was mentally, I was used to being, just feeling normal and fairly sharp. And I was in school, so I was constantly studying. And for the longest time after the seizure, I was just in this fog. I remember just conversations and classes, I felt off. And after a week or so, I remember thinking, I might never be the same. I'm used to one understanding of myself physically. I run around. If you've seen me with Talik, I love to throw him and swing him, and that's how I was. So, I love being energetic and running around, and what if I can never do that again? What if forever I'm just this hobbled, stiff person? And then mentally, I'm used to a certain understanding of who I am and how I think and how I socialize, and what if for the rest of my life, I'm just kind of distant. I'm always kind of watching a conversation while never being a part of it. I'm always kind of observing things through a foggy glass. And I remember the word that just kept popping in my head is that I just feel broken. And I remember just for a while just not knowing how things were going to change. Like maybe they will, hopefully they do, but I'm not sure. And starting to grapple with what if I am never the same? And I remember going to chapel. I was at the seminary at the time, and we had daily chapel. And, I always go, so I sat down on my seat. And one of my professors was preaching that day, and he shared this message from a church father who had talked about kind of mosaics and pictures with broken pieces. And he talked about how Jesus allowed himself to become broken on the cross and then rise again so that broken people like us could be pieced together in this beautiful picture. That even the most broken shards could find a place in what God was doing because of Jesus' willingness to be broken first. And it was in hearing that promise and hearing what Jesus had done that I realized that I might always be broken. I might never be the same, and yet I had a place in God's family. I had a place in God's love. Now, I just shared that with you, and at no point did I tell you, you're pretty dumb if you don't believe in Jesus. At no point did I tell you, I'm going to twist your arm, but I'm telling you what I know, and I'm telling you what I've heard of what Jesus has done for me and what Jesus has done for you, so that no matter how broken you might feel, no matter how off you might feel, broken people can find a place in God's family too. And I highlight this because, again, this is something that we just, as Christians, want to do naturally. This is just something that our life is built around. And sometimes when we talk to those who are not Christian, and I realize if you're not Christian too, it's again, you're wondering questions, and that's fine, but sometimes a cultural baggage comes with it, or a brand of Christianity. But sharing what we've seen and known is so easy, but it's something that can become very uncomfortable, and I don't disagree with that. It is something that can feel awkward, and especially as we're talking to non-Christians, talking to those who maybe don't believe. But I want to share this too, that as we're doing this, one of the ways that we can continue to share is with sharing with one another. You think about it, and I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes, we come to church on Sunday, and then we talk about Jesus, we praise his name, and then we go back to our homes or with our friends who are also Christian, and Jesus is like absent. Let's talk about the real world now, right? These are the real problems. These are the real things happening. So I wanted to share, this is from a letter that Martin Luther wrote. It's in our church's beliefs. Martin Luther thought he was on his deathbed, and he ended up getting better, but there was going to be a meeting talking about the faith, and he was quickly writing down some things. He said, if I can't make it to this meeting, here are some things about the faith that we believe. And one of the sections, he's talking about how we receive that good news. What are the ways that we hear it, that we're reminded of it? And what's really cool is there are some ways that are pretty obvious, but there's one that I really want to highlight. So these letters are called the small called articles. So Martin Luther wrote this. He said, we now want to return to the gospel, that good news, which gives guidance and can help against sin in more than one way, because God is extravagantly rich in his grace. So he's going to talk about 5 ways that we get the gospel, 5 ways that the good news of Jesus comes to us, right, in our hearts and our mouths. First, through the spoken word, in which the forgiveness of sins is preached to the whole world, which is the proper function of the gospel. So he says, first, it's what we do on Sunday. It is proclaimed to us. It's one of the reasons why here at Renewal and our sister campus St. John's, hopefully you will never find a sermon that does not pronounce Jesus to you. If you do, if I ever do that, please talk to me, because I've screwed up. So first, how do we receive the gospel? It is proclaimed to us. Second, through baptism. All right, so the word comes to us, spoken to us with the water, declared God's child. Third, through the holy sacrament of the altar. This is what we're celebrating a little bit. Communion, the Lord's Supper. So again, the word spoken to us, received in bread and wine, Jesus' body and blood. Fourth, through the power of the keys. So this is a reference to when Jesus tells Peter and all the disciples that whatever you forgive on earth will be forgiven in heaven, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. So when we do confession and absolution, that is God forgiving. That is the gospel coming to you. And then catch this out. This is the 5th one. And also through the mutual conversation and consolation of the brothers and sisters, referencing Matthew 18, where 2 or 3 are gathered. And so Martin Luther says that when it is preached to us, we get God's good news. When we are baptized, we get God's good news. When we receive communion, we get God's good news. When our sins are forgiven, we get God's good news. But it also comes through our conversations through one another. That when we talk to one another, it is rich, that it is God actually working through brothers and sisters in the faith, our everyday conversations. And this is something again in life group. This is when you're getting coffee with a friend. And when we speak that, when we speak a word about Jesus for that person, whatever they're going through, that it is Jesus for them, gospel, all the promises right there. This beautiful, beautiful picture. And so we see here, if you look back at Romans 10, this was the first verse we read, right? That this word is near you in your mouth and in your heart. And so we want this word that we hear to constantly be ruminating in our heart and speaking to one another. It's one of the best things we can do for fellow Christians is just to remind them of that gift. Again, it can feel trivial because we're all Christian, we all know about Jesus, but to once again remind each other. And again, it's the more we talk to one another about this, the easier it is to talk to people who we're not sure what they think, right? Because it just exudes out from us. So we want to be so saturated with the gospel that it flavors all of our conversations and actions, right? We want this promise to be so endued in Renewal Church that when we talk to one another, somebody's going through something, we don't brush past their issues, right? That's not what I'm saying, but that it is so pointed to Jesus Christ and what he's done that all of our actions, all of our conversations have this gospel flavor, right? That it just drips. You can't avoid it. I read one book, they described it as leaking Jesus. I don't know if I like that picture, but if that works for you, like you're just so full of Jesus, you leak him. I'll leave that to you. You can decide. If you don't like that, just forget it. But we want to be so saturated, so full of this. I heard the story of this little village in Germany. It was this community, and during the week, they would, as an entire town, it was all Christian at the time, they would gather around the Word, and they would read some scripture, and then different people would just get to share. Here's what I hear from it. Hey, I was thinking about this, and so on. And so it was surrounding villages would also do it, and there was this one guy who was really well known in the area. He was a tailor. He was pretty well off, and he was a very elegant speaker. And so whenever he was at these things, people were always really excited because of the things he could share. They always got a lot out of it. And I heard this story about he was in this village, and he knew all the people in the village, and he was walking on the street, and he saw a man who had also been at this scripture reading, this time gathered together. And this man that he saw was in a little bit different. So you have this tailor who's well-off, elegant, and then coming on a little horse-drawn carriage is this local peasant man who has in his entire mouth one tooth, and he's pulling a cart of horse manure. And they greet each other, they know one another. And the first thing that this man on the cart says, right? Again, he's this man with one tooth pulling this manure. He sees this tailor, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "How did the word speak to you today?" And this beautiful picture of two people who in no one's right mind would think, oh yeah, those two go together. And yet what unites them is God's word, God's promises. And so we want to be people who are constantly talking about what God has said, what he's done. How has the gospel impacted you? How can I help you? That's what we're after. And so to pull this together, like I said, the series is about our vision. And so when we think about our place, we believe the Renewal Church, our sister campus, St. John's, that we are here to proclaim that news to the world, to proclaim it to one another, and to send people out to proclaim it. And so our vision for our church, and if you were to look out 7 years, is that by September 15th, 2030, we will train and deploy 150 spirit-led and courageous leaders or everyday missionaries who will make a gospel connection within their community, which will result in renewed hope in Christ. All right, so this is, again, forward-looking, 7 years. Fun fact, this is our sister campus, St. John's 150th anniversary, which is why I got 150. But our goal as two campuses is that by that point, we'll have 150 people who are led by the Spirit, who are being courageous in how they are leading, whether that's life groups or other areas of ministry. But I especially want to highlight this, are everyday missionaries. So people who are willing to say, this is my sphere, this is who God has put in my life. I'm going to look for ways to proclaim that news to them. It doesn't have to be forced into every conversation, right? I'm going to love them, I'm going to serve them, and when the door opens, I'm going to find ways to share this news for them so they can receive a gospel connection, right? A connection based around the good news of Jesus within their community, which hopefully will then result in renewed hope in Jesus Christ. So we want to be a people who share this news with other people, right? Jesus says, if you receive a light, you don't hide it to yourself, but it's shared for all to see. And so we want to be a people who are so saturated with the word, so gathered around the word, that our conversations with one another are filled with it. And then hopefully what we're working towards is that on our campus and our sister campus, that we are sending people out, that each of us sees our place in God's kingdom, right? Some of us, we're going to have a lot of connections, a lot of people to talk to. Some of us, we might just have a couple. But here's the deal. You know so many more people than just I know. I have my sphere. I have my people that I can care for, love, and hopefully proclaim that news to. But there are corners of this city, this world that you can reach, that God has given you. And so our hope then is to be able to come alongside one another and support one another. Because again, this can feel awkward, it can feel difficult, but we're walking together. We're doing it. And there's going to be times where we have an open door, and we kind of back out, and there's forgiveness, there's restoration, and there's encouragement. Hey, next time. So brothers and sisters, as we close out, I just want to encourage you to rejoice in that good news. Right? This is the greatest news of all, that Jesus Christ became broken for you, so as broken people we could fit into his picture, we could fit into his family, that he died and rose so you could have new life and new hope. And I hope that we can be so filled with that hope and joy that we just can't help but share it, that we just can't help but tell the world that this is for them too. There is nobody for whom this does not apply to. May that be our hope, our joy, for now and forever. Amen.